Okay, so I want you to picture something for me just for a second. The date is March 31st, 1922. It's a Friday. And we're standing in the deep, freezing heart of Bavaria, Germany, at a remote farmstead. It's called Hinterkaifeck. Now, it's about 70 kilometers north of Munich, but
Yeah.
psychologically, it feels like it's on the dark side of the moon. It's surrounded by these really dense, dark woods. The ground is frozen solid, hard as iron, and snow is just covering everything. Yeah, and as the sun goes down on this Friday, 6 people are about to be brutally murdered.
But the murder itself, as horrible as it is, and believe me, it is truly horrific, that isn't even the weirdest part of this story. It's what happens right after. Because the killer, they don't flee, they don't just run off into the night, they stay. They stay in the house with the bodies, they eat the family's food, they sleep in their beds, they even go out and tend to the cattle for days.
That is the part that it just doesn't compute. The sheer audacity of it, or maybe the madness of it. So welcome back. Today we are unpacking one of Germany's most terrifying and, well, most baffling unsolved mysteries, the Hinterkaifeck murders. I've been digging through this huge pile of sources, police reports, modern forensic analysis, even some fascinating cultural history about 1920s German cinema.
And our mission today is to try and get our head around not just who did this, but how something like this can even happen, especially in a community that is supposed to be so tight-knit. We really need to look at the psychology of the time, the farm's layout, and this strange, creeping dread that was building up for weeks before the murders even took place.
Exactly. Now, before we really jump in, I want you, our listener, to do something. Try to put yourself in the shoes of the neighbors, or maybe even better, the investigators who eventually showed up. I want you to ask yourself, how does a person just vanish into thin air in the snow?
Yeah.
Why would you feed the cattle right after slaughtering the family? And probably the scariest question of all, who was the man the maid heard walking around in the attic?
Yeah. It's like a locked room mystery, you know? But the locked room is an entire farmstead surrounded by a moat of snow.
So let's get into it. Before we can even get to the blood and the weapon, we have to set the stage. I was looking at the historical data, and 1922 Germany, it's not just a backdrop here. It's almost like a character in the story. The atmosphere is just intense.
Intense is, I was putting it mildly, the context is absolutely vital. We're in the Weimar Republic. World War I ended just 4 years before, and Germany is just, it's a fractured nation. You've got hyperinflation starting to spin out of control, so money is becoming worthless. Political instability is everywhere. There are assassinations, these paramilitary groups roaming around. There's this lingering collective trauma from the war that just hasn't healed at all.
It feels like the entire country is a powder keg waiting for a match. And what really jumped out at me in the research was this comparison to a film, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. It came out in 1920, so right around this time. Have you seen it?
I know, yes. It's a masterpiece of German expressionism.
Yeah.
A really disturbing film.
It is terrifying. The sets, they're not realistic at all. They're these jagged landscapes, sharp angles, walls that sort of tilt in on you. It's incredibly claustrophobic. And the sources suggest this visual style wasn't just, some artistic choice. It was a reflection of the national psyche.
Precisely. The film deals with madness, with brutal authority, and that really, really thin line between sanity and insanity. That jagged look, it reflected a society that was completely on edge, prone to hysteria, fearful of what was hiding in the shadows. It speaks to this subconscious need for order, or maybe a deep-seated fear of a tyrant. And when you look at the Hinterkaifeck investigation, it feels like a scene cut straight from that movie. The isolation, the sheer irrationality of the violence, that stark contrast of the dark woods against the white snow, it fits that psychological landscape perfectly.
It's like the world itself had gone a little bit mad, and this one farm was the epicenter. And speaking of the farm, let's zoom in a bit, from the national level down to this specific spot, rural Bavaria. This is not the cabaret nightlife of Berlin we're talking about. This is grim, hard living.
It is. Based on the historical archives and some old silent film footage we looked at, you get a picture of a life that is deeply traditional and incredibly isolated. We're talking about people who are deeply, deeply religious. You see roadside shrines everywhere, crucifixes at every crossroads.
Right, and their whole day is dictated by the church bells, everyone stopping for the Angelus prayer out in the fields.
Yeah.
And the clothing, the sources describe the men in lederhosen, these knee breeches, sometimes using old coins for buttons if they had a bit of money. The women in these heavy, dark skirts.
And the work is just grueling. Farming, wood carving, maybe playing a zither in the evening if you're lucky. But the key factor here for our story is the isolation. In this part of Bavaria, villages were usually built with houses all clustered together for protection. It's a holdover from, historical invasions. But Hinterkaifeck was different. It was an Einödhof.
which translates to lonely farm, right?
Yeah. Exactly. It was about 500 meters away from the nearest village, Gruburn. That might not sound like a huge distance today, but back in 1922, through heavy snow and dark woods, that's a desolate, lonely distance. They were completely on their own.
And I was looking at the notes from that art professor who built the scale model of the crime scene, which, by the way, is a horrifyingly detailed piece of work. He pointed out something that really changes how you visualize this whole thing. The living quarters were unbelievably cramped.
Yes, that's a crucial detail. The professor noted there was, and this is a quote, barely room to swing a weapon inside the house. It highlights the intimacy of the violence. This wasn't a sniper shot from a distance. The ceilings were low, the rooms were tiny. Whoever did this was up close, personal, breathing the same air as the victims.
Yeah, that makes the whole attic detail even worse, which we'll definitely get to. But first we have to talk about the prelude. Because this didn't just happen out of the blue. It wasn't a random lightning strike. There was a buildup, a slow, creeping dread that started months before.
The haunting of Hinterkaifeck, if you want to call it that, really begins about 6 months before the murders. The family's maid at the time, a woman named Kristen Rager, she abruptly quits. And she doesn't just give her notice, she packs her bags and flees.
She told the family the house was haunted. She was hearing strange voices, footsteps in the attic when nobody was up there. She was absolutely terrified. And the father, Andreas Gruber, he just dismisses it.
He thinks she's mentally disturbed. He just chalks it all up to superstition. But then as we get closer to March of 1922, the strangeness just ramps up. It goes from maybe it's a ghost to someone is definitely messing with us.
The newspaper incident really stands out to me. Andreas finds a newspaper from Munich on his property. But here's the thing. He didn't subscribe to it. The neighbors didn't subscribe to it. The postman swore he didn't lose it. It just appeared.
It's chilling because it implies an intelligent intruder. A ghost doesn't bring a newspaper from Munich to read while they wait. It suggests someone was watching the house, maybe passing time, and maybe even leaving a kind of calling card.
And then the physical security starts to fail. A set of house keys just vanishes, gone. And then they find scratches on the lock of the tool shed, the machine room, like someone was trying to pick the lock or pry it open.
But the detail that always just stops me in my tracks, the one that every source emphasizes, is the footprints.
The footprints in the snow. I mean, this is like a horror movie trope, but it's real life. Andreas goes out after a snowstorm and finds 2 pairs of footsteps. They lead from the dense, dark forest across this pristine white field and right up to the farm.
And
there are no footprints leading back.
That's the moment. That is the moment of realization. He knows. He has to know someone walked to his house and never walked away.
But he doesn't call the police. He searches the barn. He searches the shed. He finds nothing. But the tracks are there. It's the physical proof that the danger has arrived and is staying.
He did tell his neighbors he heard footsteps in the attic at night. He searched again, still found no one. He told the neighbors about it, but, and this is the real frustration of the case, when a neighbor offered to lend him a gun, Andreas refused. He said he wasn't afraid.
That pride or stubbornness, or maybe he thought he could handle it himself. And there was that weird money thing too, right, with the church confessional.
Yes, 700 gold marks found in a confessional. Victoria, the daughter, admitted she left them there, but she never explained why. It just adds to this whole atmosphere of secrets. Was it penance money? Was it blackmail? We just don't know.
Well, speaking of penance, let's talk about the family. Because if we're going to understand who might want them dead, we need to know who they were. And looking at the community reports, they were not exactly the most beloved family in the area.
Far from it. The dynamic at Hinterkaifeck was toxic. You have the patriarch, Andreas Gruber, 63 years old. By all accounts, he was a tyrant. Reclusive, abusive, wisely disliked. He was known to beat his wife, Cecilia, and his children. He ruled that farm with an iron fist.
And there's a really dark secret hanging over the farm. Actually, it wasn't even a secret, was it? It was a matter of public record.
It was. In 1915, so 7 years before the murders, Andreas and his own daughter, Victoria, were convicted of incest.
Wow. And you have to imagine the social stigma of that in 1915 in rural Catholic Bavaria.
Oh, it would have been absolute social suicide. Andreas served a year in prison. Victoria served a month. The community shunned them. They were pariahs. And this isolation wasn't just geographical, it was social. If they were in trouble, would the village rush to help them? Probably not.
And this really complicates the family tree. Victoria was a widow. Her husband, Carl Gabriel, reportedly died in World War I back in 1914, but she has this son, Joseph, who's 2 years old in 1922.
So who is the father? That's the million-dollar question. The community rumors, they heavily suggested Andreas, her own father, was also the father of her child.
But Victoria was telling a different story, wasn't she? She was reportedly getting ready to sue a neighbor, Lorenz Schlittenbauer, for child support, claiming he was the father.
Yeah. Right. So you have incest, you have an abusive father, you have a lawsuit against a neighbor that could ruin him financially and socially, and this whole tangled web of paternity, it creates a massive amount of tension.
And in the middle of all of this, on March 31st, a new maid arrives. Maria Baumgartner. She's 44 years old. She arrives at the farm at 5:30 p.m. She unpacks her things, she's shown to her room, and within a few hours, she'll be dead. It's just heartbreaking. She literally walked into a slaughterhouse on her very first day of work.
It really emphasizes the tragedy of timing. She was an innocent bystander caught in a long gestating family tragedy.
Okay, take a deep breath. This is where we have to go into the dark. We're on the night of March 31st. Based on the reconstruction, how does this go down? Because they weren't all killed at once, right?
No, the forensic reconstruction suggests something methodical, almost ritualistic, alluring. The killer or killers didn't just storm the house, they waited. They waited in the barn.
In the barn. So they're controlling the territory.
The stable connects the house to the barn. And one by one, the 4 adults, Andreas, his wife Cecilia, Victoria, and the 7-year-old granddaughter, also named Cecilia, were lured out to the barn. We don't know exactly how. Maybe the killer made a noise. Maybe they untied a cow to cause a commotion.
So someone goes to check on the noise.
And as they enter the barn, they're struck down. The weapon was a mattock. For anyone who isn't a farmer, this is a heavy, heavy tool. One side is a wide blade for digging. The other is a pick or an axe head for breaking roots. It's brutal and effective. And then they waited. They killed one. Then the next family member came out to see where the first one went, and they were killed. The bodies were essentially stacked. The next victim fell on top of the previous one. Eventually, the pile was covered with hay and an old door. It was just cold. Calculated.
But they didn't stop in the barn.
No. Once the adults were gone, the killer entered the living quarters of the house. They went to the maid's room and killed Maria Baumgartner in her bed. And then, and this is the hardest part for me, they went to the bassinet where 2-year-old Joseph was sleeping.
And that's the end of the Gruber family. But, and this is the part we really need to unpack, this isn't the end of the activity at the farm.
This is where the ghost occupant phase begins. And this is what separates Hinterkaifeck from almost any other crime I've ever read about. The murders happen on a Friday night. The bodies are not discovered until Tuesday, April 4th. That's 4 full days.
Let's walk through those days. Because the killer didn't just leave.
April 1st, Saturday. 2 coffee sellers, Hans and Edward Shurovsky, they come by to take an order. They knock on the door. No answer. But they notice that the gate to the machine house is wide open. They walk around the yard. They sense something's off, but they don't know what. They eventually leave.
But someone was there, listening to them knock.
Absolutely. And then the night of April 1st gets even stranger. A butcher, Simon Reislander, is passing by the edge of the forest. He sees 2 mysterious figures standing near the trees. When they see him, they turn away to hide their faces.
And then there's the carpenter, Michael Plunkel. This story, I mean, this feels like a scene from a thriller.
Plunkel passes the farm at night, and he sees the oven chimney is smoking. The house looks alive. So he approaches, maybe to say hello or just check in. And suddenly, a man with a lantern steps out of the house. He doesn't speak. He just holds the lantern up and shines it right in Plickel's face, blinding him.
It's intimidation.
Pure intimidation. Then the man turns and walks back toward the stable without saying a single word. Plickel gets spooked and just leaves. He didn't know it, but he was staring right at the killer.
So Sunday passes. Monday passes. The cattle are being fed. We know this because the animals were healthy when they were found. Someone is milking the cows. Someone is eating bread from the pantry.
And then comes Tuesday, April 4th. The mechanic, Albert Hoffner, this is the detail that just blows my mind. He arrives to repair an engine on the food cutter. He waits for an hour for the Grubers to show up. He hears nothing but the dog barking inside and the animals, so he just decides to start working.
He works for 4.5 hours.
Think about that. 4.5 hours! He's repairing this loud engine. He's whistling tunes. He even stops to eat his lunch, sitting right on the doorstep of the house.
While the bodies are piled up in the barn just a few yards away.
And while the killer is very likely inside the house or in the hayloft watching him, Hoffner noted later that the barn door was open when he arrived. But later, the dog was tied up outside.
Which means someone came out, moved the dog, and tied it up while the mechanic was there.
Likely while he was running the engine, yeah. Using the noise as cover. It's a game of cat and mouse, but the mouse doesn't even know he's playing.
It's just terrifying arrogance.
Mm-hmm.
The killer is claiming the space. They aren't running. They're residing.
Eventually, the neighbors get suspicious enough. Young Cecilia missed school. The whole family missed church on Sunday. So on April 4th, later that day, Lorenz Schlittenbauer, the neighbor we mentioned earlier, along with Michael Paul and Jacob Sigel, they decide to investigate.
And this is where the investigation starts to get messy. Schlittenbauer's behavior here is really weird, right?
It's highly controversial. According to the reports, he led the charge, they break into the barn, and they find the bodies under the hay. And Schlittenbauer reportedly acts strangely. He starts moving the bodies around. He seems unfazed, or maybe with shock, but he's handling the corpses of his former lover and neighbors with this strange familiarity.
And didn't he unlock the front door?
Yes. This is a huge point of contention. Witnesses say he went to the front door of the house and unlocked it with a key. When he was asked about it, he claimed the key was already in the door. But remember, Andreas told everyone his keys were stolen days ago, so. Did Schlittenbauer have the missing keys? Or was the key just sitting there?
That is incredibly suspicious. And then the police arrive. Eventually.
Hours later, and by the time the Munich police get there, the crime scene is a disaster. It's heavily compromised. People had walked through, moved things, and get this, some of the locals who were hanging around even went into the kitchen and ate food.
No, wait. They ate snacks at the murder scene.
They fried up some sausages. It was a different time, and police discipline in rural areas was loose. But it made the forensic investigation a nightmare. Still, despite the contamination, the autopsies did reveal some specific tragic details.
I remember reading about the young girl, Cecilia.
That's the hardest detail to stomach. The autopsy showed she didn't die immediately. She had tufts of her own hair clutched in her hands. She had torn it out in distress.
Oh, God.
It suggests she woke up, or was at least conscious for hours, lying in the dark barn among her dead family. It's a level of terror I can't comprehend it.
And Victoria?
Victoria had star-shaped wounds on her head, which they matched to a specific screw on the mattock found later, but she also showed signs of strangulation.
Strangulation feels personal. You don't usually strangle someone in a robbery.
Exactly. It suggests rage, a personal vendetta.
And then they check the attic, and this confirms everything the first maid said 6 months before.
They found tiles removed from the floor of the attic. These gaps created little viewing holes so you could look directly down into the living quarters, into the bedrooms.
So someone was spying on them, like a voyeur.
And they found bacon rinds and a little bed made of hay up there. The killer had been living in their attic, eating their food, and watching them through the floorboards for days before the attack.
That explains the footsteps Andreas heard. It wasn't a ghost. It was a man, living just a few feet above their heads.
It really redefines the word creepy.
Okay, so we have the crime. We have the scene. We have the ghost phase. Now we need a culprit. Who are the suspects? Because with a setup like this, everyone looks guilty.
The list is long, but we have to start with the man who led the search party, Lorenz Schlittenbauer.
The neighbor, the lover, the maybe father.
He had the motive. If he really was the father of Joseph, he was facing a lawsuit for alimony that would have been financially ruinous for him. Or you have the jealousy angle. Victoria was rumored to be with her father. Maybe Lorenz snapped. Maybe he couldn't take the humiliation.
And he certainly had the opportunity.
He lived nearby. He knew the farm layout intimately. And his behavior at the discovery, unlocking the door, disturbing the bodies, it really looks like someone trying to stage a scene or maybe check if he left any evidence behind.
But he was never charged.
No. He had an alibi. His family said he was at home. But families can lie to protect their own. He was also very litigious. He later won slander suits against people who called him the murderer. He fought to clear his name until he died in 1941.
Okay, let's pivot to the returned soldier theory. Carl Gabriel, the husband who supposedly died in the war.
This is a classic trope, isn't it? But it has some legs here. The idea is that he didn't actually die in France back in 1914. Maybe he faked his death or was captured and just couldn't write. He returns home years later expecting a happy reunion, and instead he finds his wife has a 2-year-old child.
A child that mathematically cannot be his.
Exactly. He realizes she's been with someone else, either her own father or the neighbor. He flies into a rage, kills everyone to erase the shame, and just disappears again.
Is there any actual evidence for this? Or is it just folklore?
It's thin, but it's persistent. Some soldiers from his regiment claim they saw him alive after his reported death. And later, there were these rumors of a Soviet soldier who spoke Bavarian, claiming to be the murderer of Hinterkaifeck. But officially, he's listed as killed in action.
Then we have the brothers, the Gump brothers. I saw a note about the Freikorps here. Can you unpack that?
This is where that political context comes back in. Adolf and Anton Gump were rumored to be connected to the Freikorps Oberland. This was a right-wing paramilitary group, basically ultra-nationalist ex-soldiers who roamed Germany enforcing their own brutal version of order.
So they were definitely capable of this kind of violence.
Extremely capable. They were rumored to be involved in other murders, contract killings. Their sister actually confessed on her deathbed that they did it.
A deathbed confession is usually pretty compelling. Why didn't it stick?
Well, Adolf had died in 1944. Anton was investigated in the 50s, but the case was dropped for lack of concrete evidence. The theory usually hinges on robbery, but the money, the gold marks, wasn't taken.
Right, the gold is still in the drawer. Which brings us to a more modern theory that I find pretty fascinating. The man from the train.
Ah, yes, Bill James's theory. He connects Hinterkaifeck to a whole series of axe murders in the United States, specifically the Villisca axe murders in Iowa in 1912.
Wait, Iowa? How does a crime in the American Midwest connect to a farm in Bavaria?
James identifies a German immigrant named Paul Mueller as the likely Villisca killer. Mueller was a drifter who killed families with the blunt end of an axe, covered the bodies with blankets, and moved around by jumping freight trains. The theory is that Mueller returned to Germany after the heat got too high in the U.S. and just continued his spree.
And the MO matches.
Surprisingly well. The use of a farm tool, the covering of the bodies, staying in the house to eat, the lack of robbery as a motive, it's a compelling circumstantial case. It suggests a serial killer operating across continents, but, proving it a century later is nearly impossible.
So we have all these theories. But this case is technically still open, right?
Technically. But in 2007, there was a major development. A group of students at the police academy in Fürstenfeldbruck re-examined the whole cold case using modern profiling and analysis.
And what did they find?
Their report is fascinating. First, they concluded that, forensically, the case is unsolvable now. And you want to know why? Because the skulls of the victims were lost.
Lost? How do you lose 6 skulls?
In a really grim twist, the heads were removed so that clairvoyants could examine them. Yes, really, and then they were sent to Munich. They were most likely destroyed during the Allied bombings in World War II, so we can't do any modern DNA or advanced bone analysis on the injuries.
That is unbelievably frustrating. But the students, they had a suspect, didn't they?
They did. The students all agreed on a prime suspect. And reading between the lines of their report, it heavily implies Lorenz Schlittenbauer. They cite things like local knowledge, mistakes in the initial investigation, and behavioral clues that really only point to him.
So they solved it.
In their minds, yes, but, and this is very important, they refused to publish the name in their final report.
Why?
Out of respect for his living descendants. They didn't want to brand a family name with mass murder based on a conclusion that was probable but not, legally provable.
That's honorable, I suppose, but it leaves us without that final period on the sentence. So what happened to the farm? Is it still there?
No, it was demolished in 1923, just a year after the murders. The locals wanted to erase the memory. They considered it cursed ground. And get this, during the demolition, up in the attic, they found the mattock.
The murder weapon was in the attic the whole time.
Hidden under the floorboards, covered in dried blood. And in the hay in the barn, they found a penknife that didn't belong to anyone in the family.
So the physical evidence was right there.
It was. Now there's just a memorial shrine standing in the middle of a field, a reminder of what happened.
So what does this all mean? We have a brutal crime, a long list of suspects, and no conviction. Why does this case stick with us? Why are we still talking about it now?
I think it's the intimacy of it. It's not just the violence, it's the invasion. The idea that safety is just an illusion. The family locked their doors, but the killer was already inside. They heard footsteps and did nothing. It speaks to that primal fear of the other watching us from the darkness.
And the isolation. If you scream in Hinterkaifeck, no one can hear you. The snow just muffles everything.
Exactly. And if you connect this to the bigger picture of 1922 Germany, it's like a microcosm of a society that was broken. The old rules just didn't apply anymore. It was a world where a man with a lantern could blind you, turn away, and you'd never know who he was.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final thought. We talked about the attic. We talked about the footprints. But I can't stop thinking about Albert Hoffner, the mechanic.
Whistler.
He's there on Atron 4th. The family has been dead for 4 days. Their bodies are piled in the barn just yards away. And he is fixing an engine, making all this noise, whistling a tune, eating his lunch on the step. And inside the house, maybe behind a curtain, the killer is just standing there, watching him.
If Hockner had walked over to the barn or tried the front door, he would have been victim number 7. No doubt about it.
But instead, he finishes his job, packs his tools, and he leaves. And the killer just lets him go. Why? We'll never know.
That is the mystery of Hinterkaifeck, the darkness that watches, acts, and then just vanishes back into the woods.
If you were that mechanic, would you even want to know how close you came? I don't think I would. That's it for this look into the Hinterkaifeck murders. We will see you next time. Stay safe, and maybe check your attic tonight.